1999's Mad Cows is a sort of comedy, sort of rom-com, sort of drama that stirred up a lot of feelings in me. Not a lot of which are any good. I first heard about this film via Cooked and Bombed, a message board specialising in comedy in a thread about piss-poor British cinema. This film was absolutely trashed in the thread, and like someone sending up the bat signal, naturally it wasn't too long before I appeared and raided Amazon for a copy. I mean, multiple people said it was literally the worst British film ever made. How could I turn down the opportunity to experience that? The problem is, this isn't the worst film ever made, but I am by no means saying it's watchable when I say that. This is fucking awful. It's just not so awful that I can really go full tilt on it. It's a very problematic film that has almost no redeeming qualities whatsoever in my opinion. But there's no defining awfulness. There's no true moment in this film where I can specifically point at it and say, right, you've crossed the line. Every element of this production gets painfully close to that point without ever actually crossing it. It's bad movie cocktease cinema at its worst, because I want to be able to unload a barrel of hate on this movie because it should deserve it. But it wouldn't be right to, because, well, this just isn't as bad as people have made out. It may well be one of the worst, if not the worst, UK films ever produced, but in a world that's birthed the likes of Ring of Terror, Cannibal Holocaust 2 and Let's Ruin Dad's Day, it's bad. But it's not desolation cinema. The film follows Maddie, an illegal Australian immigrant who's been snuck into the country via the back door by her partner, and aiming to be a Lib Dem MP, Alex. Maddie is pregnant with Alex's child, and the film picks up about 5 weeks after the birth, with Alex having dumped Maddie because he's a cheating, lying, philandering arse cramp. And Maddie, who's still coming down off the hormonal rush of having given birth, is longing to be with Alex and have a proper family dynamic. Homeless, without money, food or provisions, she ends up temporarily moving in with her best friend Gillian, played by Joanna Lumley. Lumley here is basically playing a slightly less drunk, slightly less ciggy-fueled version of Patsy, a character from Absolutely Fabulous. She's having a string of affairs and incidents with senior diplomats and MPs in the hope of scoring cash, properties or somewhere to move into to spend the rest of her days living the life of luxury. She's also in massive credit card debt. She's illegally squatting in her house and owes a lot of money in bills. So she's about to elope from the country to Jamaica to start a new life with one of her flings. That is until, while out and about, Maddie, whose breasts are so swollen and painful as a result of breastfeeding, decides to stick a bag of frozen peas in her bra for comfort while in a supermarket. This gets picked up on the store's CCTV, and Maddie ends up getting arrested for shoplifting. As she won't give the police a place of residence and she has no money or no proof of ID, she's put into prison. Not for the illegal immigrant side of things, for the shoplifting side of things. For 18 months. Jesus. Anyway, while in prison, two things happen. Maddie finds out that Alex is working to become a Lib Dem MP and begs for him to try and bail her out of prison, or at least take his child out of prison. And Maddie also makes friends with some inmates who persuade her to try and make friends with the prison's therapist, as apparently she's a pushover who can help drastically reduce sentence time, or even grant bail if the prisoners under her care make out that they're suffering in prison much more than they actually are. So Maddie speaks to the therapist, and from here the central plot of the film really begins. You see, the therapist also sees patients outside of the prison, and one of her clients is a woman who desperately wants a child but's completely unable to. After consoling the woman over her lack of fertility, the therapist hatches a rather nasty and highly illegal plan. She goes to see Maddie in prison and asks if she's interested in therapy. When Maddie says yes, she gets Maddie to sign what she thinks is a waiver for treatment. But this is in fact adoption papers for a child. Horrified when she finds out what she's done, Maddie conspires with Gillian, who returns from Jamaica on hearing about Maddie's conviction, to sneak her child out of prison in one of Gillian's handbags. After they succeed in doing this, the film then splits into two separate plot lines. Plot A follows Maddie as she manages to stealth her way out of prison, make her way back to Alex's house where she temporarily rekindles a relationship before realising that Alex is a knobless, hopeless, flapping chunk of twat, at which point she tries to thoroughly embarrass him in front of his new lover. She then goes to try and locate Gillian and her child. Plot B, running parallel to Plot A, follows Gillian as she moves from location to location with Maddie's baby, at first being tremendously apprehensive about the child, before slowly developing maternal feelings towards it, and finally fully embracing the chance at motherhood she never had. Both films' plots dovetail in the final 20 minutes, which features a reunion, a plan between Alex the therapist and the adoptive couple to steal the baby, a car chase, and a race against time to get Maddie and her child safely out of the country before she winds up back in jail or her child is taken away from her. In a climactic finish that literally left me saying, "Oh Jesus Christ," at least half a dozen times. From even the opening moments of this film, there's problems. So many problems. And it's hard really to focus on just one element that makes this film as painful as it is to sit through, really. The script is probably as good a starting point as any. It's overly wordy, most of the jokes in this really fail to land, and a lot of the humour has a faux feminist angle to it. It's all talk of boobies, wobbly parts, and how men are absolute bastards. Which was frankly insulting to myself, and I can imagine many others. It just didn't seem genuine, it was all very insincere. The dialogue felt like it had been written for chain-smoking 40 to 50-year-old women who binge-watch Loose Women and for whom Prosecco is life and fashion is the altar at which they worship. Only, it didn't feel like it was written for them by someone who was one of them. It felt like it was written by somebody who'd just been given a brief outline of what kind of women this film was aimed at and was told to just write in that kind of style. And as such it feels tremendously fake, very disingenuous, and ultimately was just not much fun to sit through. As a man I found it quite insufferable, and I don't think many women would get a kick out of this either, honestly, as I think you'd probably be as offended about it as I was. The pacing isn't great either. It's very lumpy, with a slow beginning, a bloated middle, and a manic and incomprehensible ending. It's a real mess, and I have to assume that this went through a script editing process, so Lord knows what the first draft of this looked like. The film constantly attempts wacky humour, but it's so obvious and cartoony in places that rather than coming across as wacky in a Monty Python or Mighty Boosh kind of way, it just comes across as irritating. And only making it worse, those crazy moments are punctuated sometimes with moments intended to tug at the heartstrings, like the first night Maddie's without a child. And the resulting contrast of feelings feels a bit like milk and lemon juice tonally. It's not fun. There are no likeable characters in this film. Everyone's an arsehole or irritating to some degree. Whether it's the aforementioned Alex just being 50 shades of knob, our main protagonist Maddie, who, had she just played ball a little bit rather than been arsey with a couple of people in charge, this film probably would have circumnavigated about 90% of the issues she encountered, or the supporting characters who range from being out-and-out sociopaths to being irritating and genuinely dislikable. There isn't one character I'm rooting for in this film, not one, and that's quite impressive in all honesty given how many characters are in this film. Mad Cows is actually based on a novel by Kathy Lett. It's actually a sequel to a different novel called Fetal Attraction, but that novel didn't get made into a film, which isn't unusual in the movie industry, but here it is a bit odd. It'd be a bit like if they'd done an adaptation of the Harry Potter books and started with Order of the Phoenix. Fetal Attraction sets so much up. It basically establishes Maddie as a strong, independent woman, gives her a personality and character development, and that book ultimately ends with her realising that she can still be her own woman, but if you find the right person, being in a relationship can make you stronger in ways you could never really realise. From what I can research about the novel of Mad Cows, it's much more consistent than the film. It runs with the development it's made on its characters in the first book. Alex, for example, rather than just being a love rat who's sleeping with every woman he can, is instead in the novel a family man with a wife and 2 already existing children. It spends much more time developing Maddie's character and feelings, and it removes some of the fringe characters that aren't really all that important. Most importantly, the humour is much more acidic and self-deprecating than the lol random humour that's on display in this film. This adaptation was done by Sasha Hales and Sarah Sugarman, the former being more of a TV writer, having contributed to many BBC shows, and the latter having written and directed this feature, though she only has 7 writing credits, none of which I can say I've heard of honestly. From my own perspective, it's either the case that they completely misunderstood the source material and just cranked out the film they wanted to make at the sacrifice of a pretty alright novel, or they desperately wanted an angle to run with for this film and decided that whimsy would be more widely acceptable and easy to do than wit or sarcasm. Whatever the case, in my opinion, this film's a load of balls, and that's all I can say about it, really. One thing I do have a problem calling is the performances in this. Realistically, the cast have performed exactly as they've been asked. The problem is, the performances they've been asked to give is complete hot garbage. It's all over the top facial expressions or exasperation, non-stop. That's your lot. There's no subtlety in this film, it's just relentless. Gillian and Maddie, played by Lumley and Anna Friel respectively, are both phoning it in for the most part, and this is easily Lumley's lowest ebb. I'm honestly surprised she was able to recover a career after some of the scenes in this film. This is a rough watch. Anyway, the supporting cast are insufferable, but there's no standout bad performances here. Everyone is as bad as each other, and worse still, there's not really any Tommy Wiseau moments in this film. So no quotable lines, no funny gif-worthy moments, nothing memorable. The performances here are so over the top and bad that they're actually forgettable. The Cine is nauseating, it's literally two-speed, either locked off mid to wide shots where it feels that the camera's just been plonked down somewhere for convenience, or swirling ultra-violent crash-zoomy pain. It reminds me of a Republica music video, 90s reference for the win. It's an assault on the eyes, quite frankly, and only making things worse is their choice of colour correction, which swings wildly between muted, washed out and very dull-looking colourless sets to neon-tinted hellish colorscapes that left me feeling like I needed air. Honestly, I can't begin to imagine the pain that was inflicted on the audiences who saw this on a cinema screen. It's boring and vomiting-inducing in equal measures, and I hope I never have to suffer through it again. The direction itself is a game of two halves. In terms of directing the cast, it's passable. Actors work through the scenes they're in quite efficiently, they utilise the space well, and I can definitely say this film has a memorable and striking artistic vision behind it, even if that artistic vision is disagreeable to most of the human senses. It's not great, but it's reasonable enough. I can't pick fault with it other than to say that they maybe could have gone a bit further in utilising the actors' abilities and set designs. In relation to the camera direction, it's dire. It feels like they've had 10 different music video directors in who've all taken shifts to shoot the film scene by scene, and as such it's created a tartan of terror in the form of some of the nastiest looking footage I've sat through. And I've watched Tales from the Quadead Zone. Directing duties here lie exclusively with Sugarman. She's had a varied career and is still active on the scene. I'd say her biggest hit was 2004's Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen. She also made a film called Vinyl in 2012, which has the appearance of being interesting. I may well check that one out at some point, though I'm not getting my hopes up. Even the best thing I can talk about for this film, the soundtrack, is marred with issues. The soundtrack's got some seriously big hitters on here, with the likes of Corner Shop, Billy Swan, Edwin Collins, Nile Rodgers, Tom Jones and Rod Stewart. For the most part, it's an absolute 90s fest, and as a soundtrack in and of itself, it'd be a cracking car CD or a good mop-up disc for hits you probably need but don't have. The problem is it's such a loose-fitting soundtrack for this film that its implementation is just terribly poor. I'm reminded a bit of some of the soundtrack choices for Captain Marvel, where scenes would happen and you could practically hear the patter in the edit room as one of the execs asked for more no doubt to be put in to really drive home the 90s-ness of the whole thing. Here it's no different. Scenes that didn't need a shot of pure 90s suddenly find themselves being blasted with all manner of generic pop hits from the decade. It completely jars against the overall tone and really drives an audible wedge between the audience and the characters. And that's the best thing I have to say about that. Mad Cows was released on VHS and DVD in late 2000. The VHS copy looks a bit ropey, the DVD looks a bit washed out, but thank God that it is really, because some of those neon tinted shots may well have melted my telly otherwise. Extras on the DVD are pretty slim pickings. The DVD packaging boasts a whole 16 minutes of extras. This includes some interviews from the time with the director and the cast that total 8 to 9 minutes, and basically it's a total PR exercise in trying to make out how great this film is. There's a 7-minute featurette that mixes some on-set footage with interviews from the cast, again very PR heavy and not particularly insightful, and then there's the film's trailer. I mean, it's more extras than some of the budget releases I've spoken about on this channel, and I mean, it's not like it's text-only extras or anything, but it's all a bit pointless. It's never had a Blu-ray release, and I very much doubt it ever will. I'll be incredibly surprised if it does. We'll be well into hat-eating territory that day, I can tell you. This isn't the worst film ever made, but it's bloody close. It doesn't deserve half the flack that it gets, but I sure as hell won't defend it. A half-hearted comedy drama that, in my opinion, fails to deliver on anything it sets up. If this film disappeared tomorrow, no one would care. Not one person. And I think some of the stars of this picture would probably sigh in relief. It's not worth hunting down, it's not worth watching, it's not so bad it's good, and it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. If you absolutely must see this one, double feature it with something else. My suggestion would be the Tinto Brass film Cheeky. As both films came out in 1999, both films have literally no idea how England actually works, both films try to be cutesy and funny but ultimately fail spectacularly in their goals, and the only difference between the two of them, apart from the softcore porn in Cheeky, is that Cheeky feels much more confident in its smouldering trashiness. Seriously, I think these two films would play off each other quite nicely. Avoid Mad Cows and save yourself 90 minutes. There's much better tat out there.